Thank you and greetings, everyone. So to give a bit of a context for today's journey, my story prior to Freemasonry is I was always in search of something. I grew up with a lot of family tragedies. There was a lot of emotional pain. And in order to try to cope with the situation, I always try to understand God, life, the universe. And I was a very deep child, I guess. Always a seeker for truth and knowledge. The story goes to a place where I was in a very difficult part of my life where I was going through a lot of suffering and lack of hope. And I wound up having a discussion with someone which triggered some old research that was doing for a long time in Eastern philosophy. And I had this profound shift of awareness that I stayed in for several weeks, maybe several months. And it was extremely profound. And as my story goes, I became interested in joining Freemasonry. At first, I thought, for many years that they were the quote unquote Illuminati behind all the world events, starting all the wars, etc. The basic old false conspiracy theories about us. And then after I finished my research, I came to the conclusion that Freemasonry is actually the good guys. And it was someone I really wanted to join with my whole heart. And so when I joined and I was going through the degrees, the first 3 degrees, I kind of concluded, there's many things, and some of the reasons I joined Freemasonry were probably unconscious to me. I guess overtly, I was looking for some sort of different approach to enlightenment I couldn't read in books, and maybe some, truth be told, some kind of access to material stability to help me provide for my family. And so when I went through the 3 degrees in my lodge, Lynbrook, Massapequa, lodge number 822, Grand Lodge in New York, I kind of concluded, well, I'm not going to find enlightenment here, and I'm definitely not going to find a high-paying job. But there was something about these brothers that were just good men for no reason. I just kind of really, really took to them, and I kind of fell in love with my lodge and being a part of the lodge. And so as I progressed, I went to a Royal Arch festival, and after I went through the Royal Arch, this blew my mind. I said, wait a minute, maybe what I was looking for and concluded wasn't here, is here. And then finally, when I went through the Scottish Rite and I saw the conferral of the 14th degree, the Grand Elect Mason, my head literally almost popped off my shoulders. And I realized at that moment that it absolutely, without question, unequivocally, it is all here. The answers to the universe, enlightenment, and the secrets to learning how to gain better material stability for good and altruistic reasons. And so as I progressed through the degrees, going deeper into the first 3 and expanding my education in the other degrees in the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, I started to see that there was different facets to enlightenment and this path of self-actualization. And so in one sense, the degrees, in kind of like what Albert Pike had said about the progression of the Scottish Rite degrees, which you were literally going through the degrees, getting conferred upon the deeper aspects of the virtues in each degree. And as you attuned yourself to these virtues, you would vibrate higher and higher and higher, all leading up into the point of perfection. Albert Pike believed, too, in the original Scottish Rite system, that each of the degrees of at least the first portion, the large perfection, there were literally passwords, the secret word of each degree, to the different levels and the different consciousness of each of the sephira of the Kabbalah tree of life, all leading up to the point of perfection. Now, in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, because they couldn't map a proper correlation between the degrees in the Southern jurisdiction, which used to be very similar to the old Northern Masonic jurisdiction, the passwords for each of the seraphot of the Kabbalah tree of life. The Northern Masonic jurisdiction took a different approach, and they created these they believed was the core values of the system: reverence to God, devotion to country, integrity, justice, tolerance, and service to humanity, with charity being the highest level of enlightenment or point of self-actualization. And it is in this that is one of the doors, one of the paths, rather, that leading to self-actualization or enlightenment. Carl Jung, not a Mason, he wrote a book called Psychology and Alchemy. It's a very thick, very terse book. Carl Jung studied alchemy for 25 years. There's something interesting out of this book that he mentioned, that at a certain point with his clients, he would have to cease analysis and start using symbols to access the archetypes in the collective unconscious to go the rest of the way. And in reading this, it made me realize how deep the symbols are in Freemasonry and what they're for, so that any man or any brother can approach his path of enlightenment, self-actualization, and by the use of symbols, accessing the archetypes in his own collective unconscious. So we could teach the higher truths that a man can find within himself and within the universe without getting involved with the dogmatic conflicts between the chosen religions of each individual brother, which is absolute sublime genius. And so one of the things we do, especially in the symbolic lodge, by the way, is the proper name for the Blue Lodge. No real name to Blue Lodge, and the Grand Lodge in New York would prefer officially you to call it the symbolic lodge or the symbolic degrees, is we all know that repetition is extremely important. Now, any of the things I mentioned here today, just my own interpretations, suggesting that you should believe these, but I offer them so that you may unlock some of the interpretations that you might have and unlock your unconscious. And together, we arrive at the boundaries of our beliefs and expand our beliefs at the same time, which is one of the most beautiful things about Freemasonry in its ability to do this. And so I believe that through repetition, in the degrees that we witness and in the degrees as we're learning it and to confer it on other people, it's almost like we're programming ourselves with these parts of the ritual, the verbal part of it anyway. And it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever been to, if anyone's listening to this is a Freemason, but in the second half of the degrees, usually you're so overwhelmed with everything that happened and the incredible inspiring lectures that I have studied hypnosis and I have a few certificates in hypnosis, that your critical part of your mind is literally beaten into submission in the second half. You know, the look on the candidates' faces, mine when I was going through it, and everyone else's, is you're in like a state of just openness, of like, you know, somebody call it a deer in headlights, but you are conscious and you are receiving, but you're so overwhelmed. I think that the critical part of your mind checks out. And everything that we're saying, of course, you can't grasp it, you can't retain it, but it is going into your subconscious, be recording in your brain for later on for use. And so that later on, whether you're seeing the degree again, or you're hearing a lecture, or you're reading a book on Masonry, there might be something that you read that might remember and rediscover some of the things you've seen or heard or performed in the degrees that literally awakens you and gives you an epiphany. This is common to most of us, that they get the bug, they get involved in Freemasonry, and we go to the degrees over and over again, and we see them on a deeper level, and we learn them, and we do the ritual ourselves. And then someone's giving a lecture, or you're reading a book, and you have these awakenings, these flashes, where knowledge comes to the front. It's more like a light that comes to the front of your brain that illuminates you. And then you have to figure out how to put it into words. It seems like the knowledge is more like light itself that comes to the front. Words are just hopefully to try to get someone else to have that same experience, but words are extremely poor. There's a term that says this: many times we experience the poverty of human language. And so when we have these epiphanies and these aha moments, we realize that there are so many different paths. It seems like Freemasonry gets to use all these paths to get up to enlightenment or self-actualization. There's the vibrations. And as you're increasing in your virtue and your virtuous experience, both of receiving the virtues and the values in these degrees, that kind of cleans out your emotional blocks. And we also have to do our own work to clean out our emotional blocks in many various different ways. There's also part of this is external actualization. And what I mean by that is there was a group I was a part of that was not Masonic, not in Freemasonry. It was a men's volunteer leadership group. It was very intense. It was almost like there was a lot of psychodrama going on. We would be tasked to help out an organization to help them. They had a flood in the basement. We had to re-sheetrock the whole basement for them, right? It was something we chose to do. And when we were doing it, they would break off of the team. One of the teams that was in charge of the sheetrock, they would have to have a captain, a second, and a team. And oftentimes they would come over and you'd see the captain on his knees, hands and knees, hanging away, working, and everyone standing there with their hands in their pockets. And one of the leaders of the region was to come up to him and say, "What are you doing on your hands and knees?" And the guy on the hands and knees would be saying, "Well, no one listens to me. I got to do everything myself." And so he'd make him stand up and he would tell him, "Well, how else does that show up in your life?" He goes, "What are you talking about? It doesn't. These guys are jerks." And then his team would start to offer, it's not really true. You always say that about the people at your work, you say that your family at home, and you say that to people in the group. It's your job as a man, they would say to him, to enroll other people into their jobs and hold them accountable if you are the leader of that team in whatever capacity you are in life. And so they used to tape his hands together, not tightly. And it was kind of like a goof. People would laugh and add a little bit of humor, but they would teach you a lesson. They would say, now do the job without using your hands. Now you have to figure out how to command and give orders and hold other men accountable, right? And they would say to you, when they used to say, how else does this show up in your life? It would help you really look at your life deeper. And they would have a saying, what a man does in one thing, he does in everything. And so we see in the lodge system that it's not always about reading about deep esoteric stuff or doing actual deep inner work like meditation or journaling or dream interpretation, whatever a person chooses to do the deep inner work. It's not always only about that. It's very important how we interact with other men and in other parts of society that also is. There's a very common thing, at least in the lodges that I go to in Long Island, where the junior warden's job is extremely difficult. In other lodges, they might meet in places where they can't provide food, so they'll go out to eat before or after. But in mine, the junior warden has to provide food, sometimes between 20 to 100 people, depending on the event. It's a very tough job. It's like a part-time job when you're a junior warden. And also, a lot of men will experience the pickiness or the bossiness of the master. Now, sometimes the master has never been a leader before, and he hasn't worked out those social skills and those ego issues, and he might be, giving too many commands and might be unreasonable. Well, sometimes the junior warden or the other members, they might have issues with authority for other past reasons that has nothing to do with that particular man. And so when men try to go through the line process, okay, you're exposed. And as you go higher into the line, and when you finally become the master of the lodge, you are the light of the lodge. And that shines the light on your own inner self. It also shines the light on everybody else's. And so we will project our fears and disappointment on the master of the lodge, as well as our hopes and our highest aspirations. This is a very deep learning process. In most men's lives, in most walks of life, we will not see this level of high training and development that you see in the average lodge system anywhere in normal life. It's there, but just most men don't usually get to that point where they're like a public servant, like a congressman or a senator or a CEO of a very large corporation. But going through the process and learning to be a good master of the lodge, this is a training in self-development that's incredible, that most men don't have access to. We have access to. And it's absolutely amazing. But you have to understand that age-old question you'll hear in a lot of the men's movements. If you only just pay attention, everything will teach you about yourself. And so all the little difficulties that we think are in Freemasonry, when you're really, really part of the lodge system and the Grand Lodge system, are really just opportunities for us to develop this psychodrama experience where we learn about ourselves, heal and grow and move on and become better men. Some of us quit and check out. Some of us do that in real life too, don't we? Right? So as we continue in this path of higher consciousness, we realize that probably one of the most important symbols in Freemasonry and the ultimate symbol is the temple. The temple. It is in this subject that we realize one of the most sublime truths, that you are the material and you are the builder working on the material. Freemasonry is a fraternity that leads a man through two great obstacles to self-actualization: tyranny, superstition. Enlightenment. To become enlightened, you must know the secret. But you also have to enlighten the world. One cannot go without the other. Freemasonry frees both the man and mankind. There is no question that there would be United States of America without Freemasonry. The 6 great revolutions that history proclaims as the great revolutions, meaning they took power away from tyrants and gave them to the people. All 6 of them were all initiated by Freemasons. Not Freemasonry, because we don't get involved in that political debate, but all the greatest men that did this were Freemasons. And today our greatest challenge is to recognize the pain caused by our complacency, brought on by the hard-won freedom from those that came before us, to protect each other from superstition, politically and spiritual, and tyranny. A bodhisattva takes a vow that even if he become enlightened and earn the right to go into nirvana, they will choose not to, choose rebirth and death again and again and again, until all sentient beings are free. For there's a lesson in Kabbalah that once there was only one human being, original creation. And as this creature was being filled and loved and expanded upon by God, it became conscious and realized it was being loved infinitely. But out of shame, it felt that it didn't earn it. It pulled away from God, tore the universe apart, and burst into 600,000 particles of light. And that all the human beings in the cosmos are particles of the once human being, one with God. And so if one man becomes enlightened, how can he go to heaven? How can he go to nirvana without everyone else? There would only be one small piece of him. And so one of the highest truths is to realize that we're all one, and all of us have to go in, or none of us go in. So we've heard that the secrets of Freemasonry are hidden in plain sight. I propose that they're hidden such in plain sight that it is literally on the petition. When they ask those 2 questions: do you believe in the existence of one ever living and true God? Do you believe in the immortality of the soul? And so the royal secret, the best way we could say this without violating our obligation and getting kicked out of the fraternity would be to say it this way. The Lord is in his holy temple, and you are the temple. And when you know that, you know enough. Thank you very much for allowing me to give tonight's lecture.